and thank you for attending my talk on marketing automation with Drupal, or tracking that the evil. It's kind of strange to be doing this online, but things are as they are. Just a few things before we get going. I just wanted to explain to people that this is not really going to be a step-by-step how-to. It's aimed at users and editors because it's more about explaining and signposting. So I'll be showing you software, Drupal modules involved, explaining principles. We'll spend a bit of time talking about data privacy in general, just to set expectation. The other important point is that with this platform being as it is, and I'm on my own, I don't have a moderator with me today, I'm going to be taking all of the questions at the end. So I should be finished with about 10 minutes to spare. So we should have plenty of time for me to go through any questions that get asked during the session. So feel free to use the question and answer mechanism. And I will circle back on any questions you ask at the end. So who am I? My name's Greg. I'm one of the directors of a company called Code Enigma. We're a Drupal specialist agency in Europe. And if you want to get hold of me, you can find me on Twitter, or obviously Drupal.org. And you can also get extra marks for finding me on Mastodon, since we're all here as open source software advocates. So I'll be sharing my slides anyway via social media, but that address there is my Mastodon address if you want to connect with me on there. So how did I get here in terms of talking about data privacy and marketing technology and so on and so forth? I'm not actually a marketer. That's not my background. In fact, my most recent background is in information security, Linux hosting, that kind of stuff. And with a particular interest in data privacy that comes around that kind of market. So I kind of got into this via that route. And to give you a bit of background, at the start of the year, I actually went to a conference when we were still able to have conferences called New Adventures, which is a little conference in Nottingham. I'm not affiliated with this conference in any way, by the way, but I would say if you ever get a chance to go, it's hands down the best conference I've ever been to. It's not really a tech conference. It's more a what's the future of the web going to look like conference. And I saw this lady here, Laura Kelbag, talking. And she did an excellent talk. She's a British designer who lives in Ireland, and she's a privacy advocate. And she did an absolutely excellent talk on building technology that respects user privacy. She also gave people tips on how to defend themselves against technology that doesn't respect their privacy. But it was a fascinating talk. I'm not going to play it now. I've put it in the slide deck so that if anybody wants to watch it later, they can. There's a link there. It was off the back of Laura's talk that I got really interested in this idea of, well, what have we got out there already in the open source tool market, tool chain, that we could do to start building privacy-friendly marketing. So having jumped forward a little, I'm going to jump back a bit with the question, what is martech? Normally, this is the point where I would say, who's heard of martech, and people would raise their hands, but because that's not really practical in this session, I'm just going to forge ahead. So apologies to people who already know what martech is. If you don't, you won't find it in a dictionary. It's a new word. You won't find it yet. Maybe you will one day. It's basically a blanket term to describe a suite of technologies and tools that are there to assist marketing professionals online. I've wantonly stolen this infographic from the website martechleader.com. There's a link underneath it to their actual article that I lifted it from, which is actually quite a good article. The circle doesn't quite go in order of the parts of the martech stack as they run through them, but they describe the journey as one that begins with content generation. So you've got your content management system. You've got social media engagement, potentially. Maybe you've got video, blogs, I don't know, things going on like that. Then another part of the martech stack is the analytics and reporting piece. So you've got analytics and tagging going on. So you'll have things around that. Another layer is that lead capturing part. So the lead management and sales enablement, they're kind of close together. Lead capturing is one part of it. The other part of it is the customer relationship management. So your CRM tools will be there and somewhere around lead management and sales enablement. And then finally, they've got this whole thing about data and programs, which is, what do you do with that data once you've captured it? How do you model it? What do you do with it? So where does Drupal sit in this martech landscape? So it is already a part of the martech stack for most organizations, whether they realize it or not. Certainly on a simple level, Drupal is there in that content creation, generation, and management side of things. Clearly, it's a content management system. That's what it's for. So we've got simple examples of Drupal helping in martech. It helps you create good content. You've got taxonomy within, you've got your social media integrations, contact forms, gathering information about people that way. So there's various simple bits of martech built into Drupal already. Some of you may already be working with more complicated martech solutions as part and parcel of working with Drupal. So you might be talking about things like more complex commerce solutions. You might have various integrations around analytics. Some are more popular than others. A lot of you probably install Google Analytics as pretty much standard, for example. There's potential for CRM integrations. Quite a lot of our customers actually use customer relationship management tools and have them integrated with Drupal, so that when you actually do things in Drupal, people contact you via Drupal, it goes into the relationship management software. And some of you, if you haven't yet, may after this talk also get into managing lead generation and things via Drupal as well. There's various modules and platforms out there that allow you to start developing leads via your content management. So yeah, so this is quite cool. What's the catch is the question, and this is where we circle back to Laura's talk about privacy. There's a set of regulation here in the European Union called GDPR. Hopefully you've all heard of it. I prefer to call it doing the right thing, because GDPR actually is only legislating what we should be doing anyway, in my personal opinion. So it's got a couple of titles. In English, it's the General Data Protection Regulation. If you're a francophone, then it's the Règlement Général sur la Protection des Données, RGPD in France. Because Europe has, I don't know, 30 plus different languages, it may have been translated many times and you may know it by a different name, but GDPR at its base, or RGPD, is the regulation that the European has put out. Right. And if you're in digital marketing anywhere in the world and you're serving content to EU users, you need to be aware of this. It's not just for European companies. And just by way of an example, France fined Google $56 million, I think just a couple of weeks ago, for GDPR breaches. So I know that fining Google has become a bit of a national pastime for France. But nonetheless, this is a regulation that has teeth and it applies to people who are outside of the European Union as well. And it's protecting the privacy of users on the internet. The internet is still a fairly brave new world. Tools are evolving all the time. It used to be pretty much unregulated, and privacy and unauthorized use of private information is one of the biggest challenges that the internet faces. This regulation is probably the strongest online personal privacy protection in the world right now. And I think that's a really good thing. I'm actually quite proud that Europe is leading the way on this, and it should be setting the standard for global privacy protections. So how do they do this? There are 7 core principles. I've lifted these off of the Information Commissioner's Office website in the UK. But essentially, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. That is the essentially that you're respecting the law, you're applying it fairly, and you're being open and honest about what you're doing with people's data. Purpose limitation, you're clearly collecting data with a specific purpose in mind, and you're not collecting more data than you need to achieve that purpose. Minimalization, again, not taking more data than you need. Accuracy can be important if you're got sensitive information that's time sensitive about people, that it's your responsibility to keep that up to date. Storage limitation, that you don't keep it for too long. Integration and integrity and confidentiality and security of data is a given, obviously, that you don't leak that data, which is where a lot of organizations have been falling down recently. And finally, fairly new in GDPR is accountability. So that actual ability to actually say you are accountable for how you handle other people's personal data, and that's what gives it its teeth, really. This accountability. In fact, larger organizations now have to have a person in post with the specific role of being responsible for privacy and the data that that organization processes on private individuals. Okay, so that's all cool, but what if your martech tools are all in the cloud? How do you know that you're complying with the law? How do you know that you're respecting user privacy? How do you know what these organizations are doing with this stuff, right? So some suppliers are simply not GDPR compliant. Some of them, it's not in their commercial interest at this point to be GDPR compliant, so they just don't do it. Some say they are, and they may well be, but the problem is that you can't audit them. You can't find out any technical information about how they're processing data, so you just have to take their word for it. And as we see from the fines that are being handed out by the European Union countries, even the large players are GDPR compliant on paper, but they keep getting caught out and doing bad things with people's data. So what's the answer to this? How do we get what I would call data sovereignty, where you actually have control of the data you're collecting? And that's where I'm sure anyone who's at DrupalCon will be on board with me when I say that open source software is the way to win in this particular situation. If you can self-host something on free open source software, you suddenly have a situation where you are autonomous and you can set the rules. So why would you do that? Because, as I said already, you have data sovereignty, you own your data, you can convince your users and also anyone else who cares that you can be truly accountable for what you're doing with the data that you're collecting. You can have certainty of storage, you know exactly where you're putting it, you know exactly how long you're keeping it for, you know exactly who can access it, and you have control over the integrity and confidentiality for the same reasons. And you also have control over your own limits. You decide why you're collecting data. You decide how long you're keeping it for. You decide what you're not collecting. So it gives you all the power to actually make those decisions and be confident that they actually rest with you and not with somebody else who works for another organization whose services you're consuming. So to that end, there's a couple of pieces of interesting software that we're going to have a look at today in conjunction with Drupal. The first one is Matamo. I don't know how many of you know this product. It's basically a drop-in replacement for Google Analytics, more or less. And it has everything you'd expect to see in a Google Analytics drop-in replacement. So you've got all of the dashboards and analytics and search and geolocation and segmentation and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to read the list to you, but I'll show you some screenshots. So this is our dashboard. You can see that we can add in different widgets. We can set things up how we want. We can have multiple sites. We can filter data. This is the visit log for one of our sites. So you can see we can track actions through. We can see what devices they're using. We've got all the usual stuff, entry and exit pages, overall time on site, number of visits per page, all of this kind of stuff, what devices they're using, everything that you would expect to get out of an analytics platform. And yeah, this is a free and open source product, which is great. The other one is Mautic, which will be less familiar to some of you because actually marketing automation and lead generation and stuff is a relatively new industry, and certainly not particularly well used in smaller organizations such as mine, until tools like Mautic started to make that easier and more cost effective. So Mautic is an automated marketing campaign and lead capturing tool. And it does lead generation, context scoring, you can build campaigns. Again, you've got segmenting, you've got all kinds of communication mechanisms built in, from social media to email to forms. Loads of stuff you can do with it. A/B testing and personalization can come straight out of it as well. So again, rather than reading the list here, I'll show you some quick screenshots. So this is our Mautic instance. This is the dashboard page that you hit when you land. You can edit this, but it shows you how many contacts have been created, how many page visits we've had, form submissions. You can all kinds of different pieces of metrics around that. Here's the contacts page. Obviously, I've blanked out the personally identifying data, but we can see when people interacted with us, where they were in the world, and so on and so forth. We've got contact segmenting, so we can use rules to put people into segments. We've got on individual pieces of content, more detailed information. So here we've got a landing page. We can see how many visits it's had and when. Normally that coincides with the campaign. We can do forms. We've got quite a complex form builder for landing pages and email building and things like that. There's a WYSIWYG editor. You can create your own themes with Twig. There's a campaign builder, which is pretty cool. You can actually start drawing out how you want the system to interact with people. This is our customer feedback campaign, or one of them. You've got this concept of points, so you can actually elevate contacts. The more they interact with you, the more points they get. So what do both of these products have in common? Well, they both integrate with Drupal, which is important, obviously. They run on the same LAMP stack as Drupal. They're based on the same PHP framework, and they can be self-hosted, which is obviously important for everything we talked about earlier. They're free and open source. They have mature, well-supported communities. They invite community contribution like Drupal does, and they have a modular structure for enhancements. So they're very much in the same kind of framework, if you like, as Drupal, in the same kind of world as Drupal. So it's familiar for us as Drupal users in terms of the technology and in terms of the community organization and the way that we can interact with these products. So hopefully you like what you've seen so far. What do you do with that? So the first thing, obviously, you have to do is get Matamo and Mautic somewhere. The first route is obviously be installed self-hosted somewhere. You trust route. There's some logos that are going to come up now. These should not be taken as endorsements, but obviously there's two groups here. The first one, the reason I've chosen these companies here is not because I particularly like them, but just I was looking around for organizations that are geographically centered in a certain place. So for example, Exascaler in Switzerland, Hetzner in Germany, Typus in the UK, Ionis in Germany, Gandia in France, Brightboxes in the UK. These are organizations that have data centers in specific places. So if you're looking for hosting within a specific geography, you might consider a company like that. Or of course, there's the big global players that everybody knows. This is not a definitive list on either side, of course. But you know, your Rackspaces, AWS, Google, DigitalOcean, etc., they all have GDPR compliance in place in theory. I would say that we're AWS partners, so we actually do use AWS, and we have checked AWS's GDPR compliance, and they've gone a long way to being as transparent as possible about how they manage that. So we're comfortable with AWS, but yeah, there are many options out there. So you can get a server with one of these organizations, and you can install Matamo and Mautic on it, much in the same way as you install Drupal. Or you could consume Matamo or Mautic as software as a service. And again, these are not endorsements, but I thought it only fair that the organizations that do the most to support these two pieces of software get honorable mentions. So on the Matamo side, there's a company called InnoCraft, which is principally behind the development of Matamo, and they run Matamo Cloud. So if you don't want to self-host, you could just go with Matamo Cloud. And on the Mautic side, Mautic were bought by Acquia, I think about a year ago. And the Acquia Campaign Studio is basically the same product as Mautic. So again, if you don't want to host it, you can actually get it straight from Acquia. There are other Mautic and Matamo as a service products out there that you could look into, consider. But they're the two that are made by the companies that are actually behind the software products at the moment. So they're worth mentioning. So you have Matamo and Mautic hosted somewhere. Let's get working with Drupal. So the first thing is the Matamo module. There is a module for Matamo. The link is there on the slide. Again, I'll share the slides publicly. This is a nice little module. It's got lots of options. Essentially, it works with the EU cookie compliance module, which is important. We'll come to that in a bit. It's possible to decide where the tracking occurs. It can do user ID tracking by role. It can track specific search terms and things like that. You can play with the do not track settings in browsers, set custom JavaScripts, all kinds of stuff. So it's quite nice. But if you're just doing a basic setup, all you need is the URL of your Matamo server and the site ID, which you'll get out of Matamo when you create a site in Matamo. And that's all it needs. After that, it can actually drop the JavaScript to the page and start tracking. So how deep you go into that is up to you. The next one is the Mautic module. This is a far more simple module than the Matamo module. It's fairly new. In fact, we've actually patched it so that it works with the EU cookie compliance module. It's very simple. All it does is include the Mautic JavaScript in pages. So all you do is give it the location of your Mautic JavaScript. And then you've also got this same mechanism to allow you to exclude tracking in admin sections of the site and things like that, which is obviously useful. But that's it for the Mautic module. So once that JavaScript is embedded in your pages, your Mautic instance will start being able to track people's journeys. And the other module that you want to consider is the EU cookie compliance module. So this module is what displays the famous cookie bar at the bottom of the page. And there's various modules that do this. The reason I've pulled this one out is because it strives to be properly GDPR compliant. And if you can see with the screenshot on the right there, it actually specifically marks in brackets the two options for consent method that are GDPR compliant. And it's got various options around how you set your policies. It can actually unset JavaScripts if they're properly set by a module in Drupal of any module. So you can be using various different tracking technologies. And you can have the EU cookie compliance manage whether their JavaScripts appear or not, as long as they are presenting them properly, which is the patch we had to make to the Mautic module. You've got custom messaging, you've got geolocalized visibility, so you can set different regulations for different territories. You can do various bits and pieces to customize how the cookies are set, how long they live for, etc., etc. So that's a very, very useful little module. Yeah, it's very important for the GDPR side of things because informed consent is one of the underpinning pieces of that legislation. So you have to have something that gives people the choice of whether they want to be tracked or not. And this module does that for you. So they're the three key modules that you'll be wanting to install on your Drupal website in order to interact with Mautic and Matamo. Now, once you've set them up with the basic settings, even just the defaults, you should be good. You should be able to start seeing your results coming in. So I've got here a contact page. So this is when you drill in Mautic into an individual contact and see what they've been doing. So in this particular person's case, we can see their histories going back in time. They downloaded an asset in October. They went to one of our landing pages. They received a couple of report emails. They got a point there for opening an email. and so on and so forth. So you start to see that you get, for your contacts in Mautic, you start to actually get a picture of how they're interacting with your various properties. And everywhere you've installed Mautic, the Mautic JavaScript, you start to pick up activities from these various places. So it occurs to me only now that I've kind of picked a bad example insofar as that there's no traversing of the Drupal website in this particular contact. But if this person had been off around the Drupal website, then those page visits would also be appearing in this list of events that you can see there on the slide. So that's all fine and dandy. You've got your Matamo and your Mautic set up. You've installed your 3 Drupal modules. You see your data coming into Mautic and Matamo. But there are a few things that we've been finding out as we go. Bear in mind that I only started looking into this technology in February when I got back from the New Adventures conference. So we've been learning some of the pitfalls of this, and I'll share a few of those with you now. Some of this software basically is too friendly. That's the long and the short of it. So the cookie compliance module is great, but it's way too easy to ignore. You can see that's our website as it is at the moment. And at the bottom there, we have this bar where I can click OK, agree, or I can click no thanks to being tracked, which is great. There we go. We got informed consent. People actually have to say that they want to be tracked, right? The thing is, a lot of people don't actually care, and they're quite happy to be tracked as long as it's to improve their experience. And so actually the problem with this is it's far too easy for people that are pretty agnostic about whether they're tracked or not to just keep using the website. They can just ignore this bar at the bottom. They can never click OK. And because we're being polite and we're doing things properly and we're GDPR compliant, we're not tracking these people. They're not necessarily unhappy about being tracked, but we haven't asked the question strongly enough. So if we look at the Information Commissioner's own website, you can see that's far more intrusive, only in the first instance. So when you hit the website for the first time, if you go to ico.org.uk, you will be given this big pop-out thing that disables the rest of the site until you close it, where you basically demands of you to make an informed choice and say yes or no, whether you're interested in being tracked, which is fine. People have the right to say no, and that's great. If they do, they do, but we know at least that we've made them make a choice. So that particular experience that you see on the ICO website is provided by a cookie control JavaScript by a company called Civic. There is a Drupal module for this, so you might consider installing that. The big pro for the Civic cookie control stuff is that because it's a hosted JavaScript, they take on the responsibility of keeping up with the legislation. So if there's a legislation change which requires a change to the way cookies are handled or change to the way things are presented, it'll just be kind of done by Civic in the background, and it'll just change the JavaScript that you pull through. On the other hand, it's not particularly easy to use and configure in Drupal. It doesn't seem to handle customization all that well, and it's not a free service. It's not an expensive service. So actually, to be fair, for the price that they charge, and the fact that you can sort of forget about the legislation as long as you're integrating their JavaScript, it's not a bad solution. But we shied away from that. So what we've been doing instead is custom theming the EU cookie compliance module, which is very much a work in progress. That's why our website currently still has that weedy little bar at the bottom. We want it to be more like this. This is on our dev site. And you can see that we're copying much more closely the Civic approach to having a more intrusive cookie banner, where we're being really clear about what we're actually presenting to people and asking that they make that decision. The EU cookie compliance is just a superior Drupal module, and it's built for GDPR. So it's a good choice. The only problem is that to achieve this, we've had to hack it around a fair bit. So what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to figure out how we can contribute this back to Drupal, contribute it back to the community via the EU cookie compliance modules project page, which we haven't quite got it right yet, but when we do, we'll be putting that back in. So another thing to be aware of is with Matamo itself. So Matamo and do not track specifically. I don't know how many people are aware of the do not track, the DNT settings now in browsers. Essentially, most modern browsers now, if you go into the settings, you can set a do not track flag, which means that the browser will set a header, and software that respects that header will automatically not track you. Of course, unfortunately, very few applications out there currently respect do not track, but Matamo is the one that does. So that's worth bearing in mind. You might not be happy with that, so you could consider disabling DNT in Matamo. It's there as a setting under the privacy part. I would caution against doing that. It's all very well disabling it on the basis that in your Drupal website, you're already asking permission via the EU cookie compliance module. So therefore, you don't need a second layer of privacy cover in Matamo. But what if you use Matamo elsewhere? You need to be careful that all the applications where you're embedding your Matamo script are also allowing people to make those informed choices about cookies, because if not, Matamo could be tracking people where it shouldn't be, because this has come off. So yeah, I mean, that's an individual choice. You can turn it off or not. But if you do turn it off, don't forget that there's also a separate setting in Drupal under the privacy tab of the Matamo module. So you'll have to do it in two places. The other thing, which was a good one, was that what we didn't think about when we set all this stuff up was tracking our Mautic landing pages. So as we began to track people with Mautic, everything was working very well, but we started to use the landing pages more and more, particularly for campaign driving. And we realized a little late that of course we didn't have any Matamo integration in Mautic. So again, this is something as a company we want to try and do something about. There is Google Analytics integration built into Mautic, but there's no Matamo module or plugin yet. So that's something we'd like to address. We'd like to actually create a Matamo plugin for Mautic, but it doesn't exist yet. As people go into Mautic and interact with content via Mautic, they might not be tracked, or they won't be tracked by Matamo unless you put things in there, the code in there. So if you want your Mautic pages to be tracked by Matamo, then what you need to do is get that embed code in there. So in this particular case, we decided to make Mautic a separate application. You wouldn't have to do that. You could keep it all consolidated together. So yeah, you create your tracking code in Matamo as you want. You go in the back end of the dashboard settings, you usual kind of thing. You tick the options you want, copy and paste your JavaScript, and then using the code editor in Mautic, you can drop it into your landing pages. You can see there's our Matamo JavaScript at the foot of our landing page there. And so like that, we've actually now got Matamo tracking people hitting our Mautic landing pages as well. As I say, if you use Google Analytics instead, there's actually built-in integration, but sadly not yet for Matamo. So the end result of getting these things working nicely together is you should have a Drupal website. You should have integrated tracking, campaign management, and lead development. You should hopefully have the marketing automation pieces and personalization options, because with Mautic, you can start to do things like embedding A/B tests into your website pages and things like that. And with the marketing automation, also with Mautic, you can potentially, if you've got a CRM, you can start setting rules about levels of points, so that when people have done a certain number of actions or some specific actions, they get sent off to your CRM. So you can start doing all of this marketing automation and martech stuff quite nicely. with a set of open source tools, and most importantly of all, you're definitely respecting a user's privacy. You can be 100% sure that you're giving people that informed choice, you're storing their data responsibly, and as an organization, you're properly managing that whole process. And so that's it from me for the moment. Thank you very much for listening. I'll now go over and have a look at the questions that you've been asking. I can see there are a few in here. Let's see, to move my Zoom box out of the way. Okay, so I'll go from the bottom up here. Sarah has made a point really, rather than the question, just that an intrusive cookie pop-up could be bad for SEO. It could be considered as a large contentful paint. I think that's a fair point. It's very widely used. I'm not an SEO expert. I'd have to defer to somebody else about that. The next question from Paul: any thought about how to block cookies that bypass cookie control because they are iframes or O embeds? It's quite tricky. Initially, we just had to code our way around that with custom logic. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to do that. I take it, I'm assuming that you're asking this from the point of view from a developer's point of view, that you want to actually use a tool that behaves in a certain way. In which case, yeah, I don't think there's any easy answer to that, except to try and potentially use services that don't behave like that. But yeah, it's not a great answer, sorry. But, Nicolas, what is your opinion regarding user tracking with regards to ethics? Do you think it's acceptable in certain cases like personalizations? What's my personal position? That's a good question. I fall back on the informed choice point. I think it's fine if you are being clear, I mean, really clear with people what you're doing with the data. So if you're, for example, using it for personalizations, if you're saying to people, we are going to track you because we want to personalize your content. These are the things we're going to keep, and this is where we're going to keep them. And it's true, and people read it and go, yeah, fair enough, then I think that's okay. So I'm comfortable with tracking. I think it's okay as long as it's true and honestly clear. So yeah, moving on to Sylvain. You're welcome. I haven't tried Tarte au Citron. I'll have to check that out. Thank you for that. I'll have to have a look. I assume that's a module, so I will find out about that. Thank you for bringing that up. So Kate says she's interested that we have both Matamo and Mautic running. She's expecting us to choose one. So how do you do campaigns? I have to admit, I'm not, as I said at the start, not a marketer, but it seems to me that the kind of campaign approaches to the two products are quite different. So Matamo does it one way. Motif is much more involved. The campaign builder and Motif is more like kind of designing journeys and reacting and sending mails and things like that, whereas Matamo is not so much along those lines, as far as I can tell. But we actually use Mautic mostly for campaigns, and we don't use Matamo for campaigns, to answer the question. Wow, the questions are coming thick and fast. Louise asks, how have we referenced this tracking in our privacy policy? This is a kind of a work in progress. That's a good question. Our privacy policy was recently reviewed by a company called Decoder Legal, who did a great job of that, and they have kept that up to date. So it should be referenced in there. I'm not quite sure exactly what the text is, to be completely honest. But the other thing as well is you saw in a development version of our website there that we've been working on EU cookie compliance module to actually, without people having to go to the privacy policy, be really clear about what cookies are being set and what they're being used for actually in that banner. Question from Timur. If you run these tools on your own server, do you manage to forget requests, data retention manually, or do they come built in? So Mautic has forget requests built in. You can actually present a page from the Mautic system that allows people to remove themselves. And you can make that public. And you can also allow them to remove themselves from specific segments. So you actually have this whole kind of opt-in mechanism where you can say, no, keep me for the newsletter, but I don't want to get any of this other marketing stuff. So that's actually something that Mautic presents. And if you create your own Mautic theme for your landing pages and things, then you can have it branded, obviously, with your company's webpage. Heike says, as far as I know, you don't need an opt-in for Matamo. Do you agree? I'm not sure about that. I take it that's a legal point. I'm no lawyer. My impression is that you should opt into Matamo. As I say, I can't offer any kind of legal position on whether that's allowed under GDPR or not. That's not my bag. But all I can say is that we do put an opt-in for Matamo. Just because it's belt and braces, then we're definitely following the rules. Kuhn, hello Kuhn, I know you. Have you analyzed the impact of these integrations on site performance, specifically on authenticated users? We actually don't have any authenticated users on our website, so that's a non-issue. We have analyzed the performance of the platforms themselves, because the important thing, of course, is that when you're dropping JavaScripts that are being generated by another system into a page, you need to be sure that that other system isn't going to be killing your page load by failing to present its JavaScript. So all the usual caveats apply about putting these JavaScripts in at the bottom of your pages and so on. But we've not seen any particular issues, and I don't see how these integrations would have a huge impact on performance for any kind of user, as they are relatively small pieces of JavaScript. The very short answer is no, we haven't looked at how this impacts on performance of authenticated users, but I don't expect it to. Corinne asks, is it necessary to display a cookie banner at all if we are only self-hosting Mattermost and it's used for anonymous tracking? That's kind of similar to the question that Heike asked below. I would tend to do it anyway. I don't know, you'd have to ask a lawyer whether it's actually required. There's a point of clarity from Eileen there on the LCP, saying that it doesn't matter as long as your cookie banner and your page in general loads quickly. Is there a way to integrate Mautic landing pages in Drupal itself? From Frederick, yes, there is. They can be presented as JavaScript snippets or as iframes. Mautic recommend embedding them as JavaScript, because that way, if you change the content in Mautic, it's automatically updated in Drupal or your content management system or whatever. But yes, you can actually export content as embed it as a JavaScript, I believe an iframe, or you can even copy and paste the HTML code if you wish to. And I see we've got about 50 seconds left. I've managed to get through all the questions amazingly, so thank you very much for that. Does anyone have anything else for the last few seconds? Just a quick, not a question, but a comment. The Drupal privacy initiative should help us in the future to answer questions like, do I need to put a cookie banner up for this? Okay, well, that's good to know. So that's something to keep an eye out for the Drupal privacy initiative. That would be great. And you're all very welcome. I hope that was useful. And thanks for listening, really.